So I just want to kick things off today and welcome all of our attendees. I'm glad that you're attending here today for our webinar, Privacy and the Post-Cookie Future of Marketing. For those who may not be as familiar with our group, Reuben Rink is a full-service marketing, advertising, and PR firm, and originally as the Bloom Agency, we've operated here in Winston-Salem, downtown Winston-Salem, for 21 years now. Our team works really hard to stay abreast of the ever-evolving developments out there in the marketing space. And it's a really rapidly changing environment, as I think everybody on this webinar today would agree. And often there's topics of general interest that we come across that either in discussions with clients or contacts or based on research that we're doing ourselves that we think will be beneficial for folks to hear about and understand more about. And that's certainly the case today with this topic around online privacy and the post-cookie future of marketing. So we hope to be providing other webinars like this as part of a series over time. We think it's beneficial for those who we interact with. We like to certainly share our insights along these lines as time goes on, so look for more opportunities. In fact, hopefully we'll even have an opportunity to do that in person sometime soon. We're really looking forward to that. For now, we're virtual, and that's just fine too. So I think without further ado, I'll turn things over to Cassidy Perkins. Cassidy is on our account services team, and she's going to act as facilitator for us today during the presentation. So Cassidy, I'll let you hit on any general housekeeping items, and we'll get rolling here. Thanks.
All right, thanks, JG. So yeah, I've got a couple of housekeeping items. You may have heard me talk about these if you jumped on a few minutes early, but your Zoom setup is going to look a little bit different here today than your typical video meeting. If you need to get in touch with us during the webinar, you can use the chat tool. So you've got a toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Make sure that you're chatting either all panelists or myself directly, since our presenter Ian is not going to be checking during the presentation. In addition to the chat feature at the bottom of your screen, you can also drop questions into the Q&A tool, and we are going to hold a 15-minute question and answer session following the main presentation if you want to follow up on anything or dig a little bit deeper into any of the topics covered. Also, watch your email inboxes after we wrap up. We will be distributing a recording of this webinar and also a PDF of the presentation slides in case you want to review or share them later on. All right, and on to today's presenter. Presenting today is Ian Joyce. He is Director of Digital Services at Reuben Rink. Ian has been working in digital marketing for around 25 years, which has given him a long-term perspective on the changes in the online space. Ian recently joined the agency after being a long-term partner of ours and works with clients primarily on digital marketing projects. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Ian to start the presentation.
Terrific. Thank you, Cassidy. So today we're going to talk about privacy as sort of a general topic and the changes that concerns about privacy are driving in the online space. And so first of all, I want to define a few things. Privacy, or specifically online privacy. And how you define it really depends on who is defining it. There's a lot of disagreement over the fine points of privacy, or even sort of conceptually what privacy is. And we'll get into that a little bit later. Then first-party data. First-party data is data that you as a marketer collect yourself. Third-party data is another concept we'll talk about, and that is data that someone else collects and then uses for your benefit. And then finally, cookies. Cookies are simply files that are saved to your PC or Mac or tablet or phone that stores a website's name and has a unique identifier that represents you as a user. So these are some of the things that we'll get into as we go through this presentation. So privacy is something that if you aren't already hearing a lot about it, you soon will be. It's probably the biggest driver of change in the online space of anything that's out there. And I'm going to start by talking a little bit about advertising technology history to give you a little bit of context. So this is the first ever banner ad. Wired magazine, or Hot Wired as it was known back then, created this. It was the first online banner. And back in the days when this banner and others like it existed, you bought online advertising very differently than you buy it today. You would typically call up an ad rep for a website, and you would ask to place an ad in a specific position on the website for a specific period of time. And then they would quote you a cost per thousand, or CPM rate that you would agree to pay. And so everything in online advertising was either mass media or it was contextual. Your ad had something to do with the content on the website. Then that evolved, and there was a bargain between publishers and visitors. And that bargain was, if you tell us a little bit about yourself, we'll give you better, more personalized ads. So this started out with providing information about interests through forms. It evolved into tracking of activity on websites, which led to what I call the surveillance economy, which is where platforms are collecting a tremendous amount of information about users. In some cases, with Facebook, for example, they gather more than 100,000 different data points about users, and then they deploy that in the service of targeted advertising. And so what has that brought us to? It's brought us to a point where, in very specific ways, we all hate advertising. It's not that in general we hate it, it's that we can identify specific things that seem to, or specific ads that seem to be too intrusive, or that follow us around for too much. We expect that privacy is going to be something that is the default. But this is where those varying definitions of privacy get difficult, because if you ask 10 people what online privacy is or should be, you're going to get 10 different answers. And so, for example, an ad for diapers, for example, might be very relevant and desired by an expectant mother who is researching, different products that they need for their newborn child. On the other hand, a teenager who is concerned about pregnancy might find that incredibly intrusive and scary. And so we have to keep that in mind as we're thinking about privacy. So what's changed and brought privacy to the forefront? The first is GDPR. It's the major driver of privacy, the General Data Protection Regulations. Initially, when they were rolled out, the thinking was that they were really just going to affect EU websites. In reality, they're affecting websites globally, and they've really become best practice for the collection, protection, and use of data. On top of that, we've got the CCPA, which is the first state-level privacy protection law. We've got the deprecation of third-party cookies, those cookies that collect information that can be used by someone else. So with if you're using Apple's Safari browser, you know that you've got the ability to block third-party cookies. Google is in the process of completely blocking third-party cookies with Chrome. Other browsers are doing the same. In the next 2 years, you're going to see that third-party cookies are really just no longer in use. And then finally, we've got Apple's iOS 14.5, which will be rolling out any day now. And privacy is by default in 14.5. When you download an app through the App Store, one of the steps that you will have to take is opt in to tracking. And so Facebook has raised a huge red flag about this. They have run ads saying basically that this will kill online advertising. That's a little bit overwrought, but it is likely that probably no more than 25% of users are actually going to choose to be tracked on that platform. So in all this, there are really three stakeholders. The first are the regulators. In the EU, at the country level, at the state level, they all have ideas, and not entirely consistent ideas, about what privacy is and how it should play out online. We've got the platform owners. We've got device manufacturers, operating system developers, social media companies, advertising technology companies that, again, have very different ideas of what privacy is and how we should allow, or how users should be tracked online. And then you have those users. You've got the people with their varying degrees or varying ideas of what online privacy is, their different preferences, and so forth. Again, ask 10 people what they want in online privacy, you're going to get 10 different answers. And it's a complicated problem. So if we look at this, it raises the question of where advertising technology goes from here. If third-party cookies are going away, if tracking is going to become more difficult, what do we do to effectively target ads or reach customers that we care about getting in contact with? And it's complicated because of all of these competing priorities. Facebook has very different priorities than Apple. Apple tends to be more of an absolutist in terms of online privacy. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have Facebook, whose entire business model is based on collecting data from users and deploying it for advertising. And in the middle, you have a lot of other companies. You've got Google, you've got, and not just Google, but all of the different parts of the, the Alphabet company. You've got the advertising business, you've got the operating system business. There are a lot of different priorities there, and those raise a lot of technical questions. So if we can't even really agree on what the problem is, it makes it difficult when you layer that over technical questions about how you actually implement tracking of users, or what that tracking looks like and how it works across different platforms. It makes it difficult to come up with a single solution. And the reality is that there isn't a solution yet for a lot of this. But that said, what can marketers do to prepare? First of all, don't panic. One of the rhetorical questions I ask, having been around working on this for a long time, is, are we really better off in terms of ad targeting now than 20 years ago? I think that contextual targeting, geo-targeting are still going to work, and they still work really well. What we're really talking about with these other targeting options are how we're going to gain back some of the efficiencies and some of the scale that we have in reaching people that has come along with programmatic ad buying. And by that, I mean, I talked about the old cost per thousand based buys with the Wired magazine banner back 20, 25 years ago. And what we've advanced to now is that buying of ads is very dynamic. We basically work with partners who can use databases that will help us identify people, and we can present those ads to them as they appear online. Pricing is dynamic. We're paying prices that vary according to the competition that we have to place those ads. So we know that there are going to be other targeting options. We know they're coming. We just don't know what they are. But in the meantime, we know that we're going to have the ability to do contextual targeting, geo-targeting, other kinds of targeting, and we know that there are some solutions on the horizon. And organizations are actively trying to figure it out. And I'll give you a couple of examples of this. They all know that we want privacy and anonymity. But again, we know that those definitions across organizations change. So there's the Internet Advertising Bureau and their tech lab, and they're working on something called Project ReARC. And essentially what they're trying to come up with is a global open standard that allows publishers and advertising technology companies to operate with certainty, in compliance with regulations, and at the same time target people in ways that conform to all the privacy preferences. So under this, this sort of umbrella project, ReARC, we would be able to do ad targeting to people who want the ad tech companies to know as little about them as possible, and to people who are looking for very finely targeted ads. And the idea here is they want a sustainable, global, accountable framework for ad targeting. And they're developing this in partnership with publishers, with ad tech companies, with advertising agencies like us. It's a very open process. And I'll share some resources at the end where you can learn more about this. One of the other organizations that's working on it is Google, and they're working on what they call their privacy sandbox. And the big thing in the privacy sandbox right now is what they call the federated learning of cohorts, or FLoC. And FLoC is a very different approach to doing tracking. It's opt-in by default. It's a one-size-fits-all approach to privacy. So it doesn't take into consideration what you or I think of privacy or what we want in terms of being known to advertisers. And basically it works by tracking browser history and then placing people based on the sites they visit into anonymous cohorts or groups of users. And then they would basically make those cohorts available for ad targeting. Now, this is a very loose definition of privacy that they're working on. There are ways, as a number of ad tech companies and privacy advocates have pointed out, of taking the information in a cohort and cross-referencing it with other databases to identify people. And because of this, DuckDuckGo, which is a privacy-focused browser developer and search engine, has announced that they're going to block FLoC. Other companies like the developer of the Brave browser and others have also announced that they are not going to allow FLoC to be used as well because of concerns about privacy. So what we're going to have over the coming years is this tug of war between the privacy advocates and these developers, platform owners, advertisers over implementation. And I think right now, from what I've seen, I think that IAB is on the right track with this. They seem to have gotten a lot of the ad tech companies online or on board with their approach. And I think they give us sort of the best shot at a sustainable way of doing targeting. So in the meantime, where does this leave us? You know, if we don't have a solution for ad targeting beyond contextual geo-targeting, some of these other ways, what can we do? Well, one of the big ways that we can prepare ourselves is by focusing on first-party data. The data that we're collecting about people we interact with, our customers, leads, and so forth. And it's not just through forms that we're putting online, but also the behavioral data. What are they looking at on our websites? What kind of content are they interacting with? And systems like Marketo, HubSpot, and so forth can give us information that we can store in a CRM that will help us understand that. We also can enter into partnerships with trusted publishers or partners. And an example of this that you may have seen is that oftentimes companies that we have a relationship with may introduce a partner and ask if you want to opt in to receive messages from them. I think that this can be a double-edged sword. It can work really well if there's a high degree of trust and relevance to the people that you're approaching with this offer. If it's not relevant, it can really squander trust or cause it to be lost. But it is certainly an option and one that we should be considering. We want to focus, though, on actionable data and thinking about future needs. We don't want to, and we want to do it in a strategic way so that the information that we're capturing is something that we can turn around and use that fits our business strategy and isn't just a mass of data that we're drowning in. We want to be sure that we're protecting the data. GDPR compliance for data protection is kind of the gold standard at this point. It's certainly something that is worth looking into, making sure that you meet that standard. It's also a good time to look at your privacy policy and decide if it needs to be updated or if it's still relevant to the way that you're collecting data. But again, you know, the big thing here is you need to start with a strategy. Often when I work with companies that are using first-party data, we'll do an initial audit of their databases, and we find that they've been, you know, really great about collecting data, but often the fields that they have available aren't always what we can use to do effective targeting. So we want to think about how we're going to reach out to these people, through what channels, the data that we're going to need to do that, and then build out the CRM or database accordingly so it supports that strategy. So I talked about resources, and these are a few that I recommend. I think it's worth reading a little bit more about Project ReARC. There's an article that I wrote that's on our website called First Party Data and the Death of Cookies that goes into a little more detail about this topic. If you want to learn about whether you are being tracked as part of the testing of the Federated Learning of Cohorts, or FLOCT, you could visit miflock.org using the Chrome browser. And it will tell you. And then we have best practices for GDPR compliance. Well worth a read. And with that, I thank you, and I'll pass it back to Cassidy for any questions.
Thanks, Ian. That was awesome. So if anyone has questions, you can drop them into the Q&A tool, and that way we can make sure that we don't miss anything. If you want to dive into any of those topics or are wondering how some of these things apply to yourself, your business, your clients, now is a great time to do so. All right. Don't see any questions popping up so far in the Q&A section. Can also feel free to use the chat feature if you've got anything non Q&A related comments, anything like that.
Don't be shy. Now's your chance to pepper Ian with questions and try to catch him. Hey, Ian, one thing that could be of interest, I see another question here, but let me just ask this real quick. You know, you're talking about the importance of first-party data and not only capturing it, but capturing it in a way that's useful and helpful with regard to fields and then opportunities to segment audiences and speak to them in a targeted way. Any examples you could give of that? You know, maybe a real life example of the kind of data delineation or breakout of fields that can often be helpful that may be overlooked early in data collection?
Yeah, I find that that typically the focus is what I'll call kind of a lead generation focus. Is what a lot of organizations start with. They want to know name, email address, a little bit of information about what individuals are looking for. But it's often built around the idea that they're going to pass these people off to someone in sales. And that really there's not a lot of forethought beyond, you know, how do we get them in the door and get their name to someone who can go do a pitch or close the deal. And, you know, we know that the customer journey for a lot of organizations is a lot longer than that. You know, there's certainly at that wide end of the funnel, the need to, at least for people who raise their hands, understand who they are, maybe where they are, why it is they're there initially. But then I think there are opportunities to start collecting a lot of other information about them. And this is again where systems like Marketo or HubSpot can come into play, because it can be an opportunity to start a marketing automation campaign and start to collect data about what is capturing their interest. It's an opportunity to see what they're visiting on the website or where they're spending time. It's really a chance to often reach out to them again through other channels and remind them that you exist. I think of it as you know, how do you start this interaction with more of a long-term view? Not simply getting their name so you can sell them something, but how do you tease out what their concerns are, what their interests are, what their objections are to doing business with you, and what that translates to in terms of fields in a CRM or database differs from organization to organization. You know, with nonprofits that I work with, for example, typically we find that, you know, even if we're looking at the journey of a donor, donors can look very different. They're not a single cohort. So they might have very specific interests in terms of where they want their money to go. Others might be more mission focused and want to support the umbrella organization. And so it's really kind of building out a way of capturing data that will give us some indication of where they fit into that universe, so that we can talk to them using the right language. Does that answer your question, JG?
Yes, thank you. Clearly, that was a good example of nonprofits, and clearly part of the point is that this is an ongoing effort. It's not just about upfront fields, but it has to do with strategic planning and then touch points along the way. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think we got several questions in the queue, so I'm going to let Cassidy steer those.
Terrific.
Yeah. So our first question in the hopper, an example of how to best target prospective customers in a digital ad in the future. This might have a little bit of overlap.
To target potential customers in the future. So right now we've got a lot of options, and we're not in this post-cookie future yet. We have access to a lot of third-party data that we can use for targeting. So, with programmatic ad buying, for example, we've got the ability to access through our partners databases that will let us identify individuals based on personas. What does the group look like in terms of demographics, location, household income, net worth, interests, job history, on and on and on. And it's really only limited by the regulations that we have to conform to. So for example, if you're in financial services or you're in the business of leasing apartments, there are more constraints on how you can do targeting than for a car dealer, for example. But we can use that data right now. And in the future, some of that data is going to go away, or how it's utilized is different. And that's part of the uncertainty that we're going to be dealing with over the next couple of years. The other ways, contextual is huge. We can look at placements of advertising in websites that we know are of interest to our customers. And it's not only, for example, I used car dealers as an example. We would not only target on automotive websites, but websites that align with the personas that the auto manufacturer has developed. So we might know that pickup truck drivers are interested in Mike Rowe's podcasts or shows or websites, and we might look at doing targeting there. So we've got that contextual targeting that we can do. We could do geographic targeting, and this can get really interesting because we've got the ability to really geofence very specific areas and target advertising to them. So for example, if you know that your competitor is going to be going to a large trade show where you're not going to have a presence, you might have the ability to really target that show hall and everybody in it with your ads so that you can be there while you don't have a physical presence. So, and then we've got search marketing, where the hand raisers, the people who are actually looking for information about specific topics, can be targeted. And then, so those are really some of the ways that we can still find these people that that you want to reach out to. And depending on your actual, the actual industry that you're in and who you're trying to target, there might be other options as well. Or there can be fewer options depending on the constraints you're working within.
All right, thanks, Ian. Our next question from Stacy Jones. We've got, how should we adjust nurture email campaigns triggered by returning website visitors? And how soon will this happen?
I would go back to my don't panic slide. I think that, a lot of what you're talking about with nurture is reliant on first-party data. So it's less likely to be a burning issue. If you've got people into your sales funnel already and are interacting with them and collecting information about them, it's not going to, I mean, you're really set up to succeed there, because those folks are people that you're going to be able to reach out to. Often the issues are really going to arise when you're trying to find those new prospects that haven't given you information, haven't indicated that they're willing to receive your messaging. So I think, that's where you have to start thinking more about what are we going to do without this this kind of third-party data dependent targeting.
All right. Another one. We've got, this one hits real close to home for me as an avid Facebook user. Can you talk about how Facebook ads have had to change to deal with more restrictive targeting? And yeah, I've seen a lot of changes in the back end of the interface, so would love to hear more about this from you, Ian.
Yeah. Facebook is, to put it bluntly, they're kind of in panic mode at this point, particularly over the iOS 14.5 introduction. And their business model is siphoning up a tremendous amount of data about individuals and then using it for ad targeting. Well, we talked about the different stakeholders, and really the regulators have had a bigger impact on Facebook than I believe iOS 14.5 will have, because they have really kind of fundamentally changed the way that that Facebook can do targeting for a lot of industries. We talked about financial services, anything around employment, and across a number of other industries. Targeting, this very fine-grained targeting that Facebook offers just isn't available. And I'll give you an example. If we're doing targeting of financial services in Facebook, we can't target by zip code because that's considered discriminatory. And that's not something that came about because of the end of third-party cookies or what have you. It came about because of lawsuits that Facebook was hit with. And regulators are taking a hard look at how some of these targeting practices can be considered discriminatory. But I think that, what we're going to see over time is a little bit of an unknown. They're still capturing a lot of data. I don't necessarily see all of this interest-based targeting going away. I see that they're probably going to be prevented from capturing some data from a certain percentage of Apple, iOS 14.5 users. But to be honest, nobody really knows what that's going to mean in terms of of the future of advertising. Facebook would claim that it's going to kill online advertising, but again, that's a little extreme. It just means that that maybe a competitive advantage that they've had in terms of data that they have about users is a little less of an advantage. But I think for us, the targeting options are not going to go away. It may just adjust, the size of the audience to some point.
All right, checking my Q&A tool here. Looks like we've got one more question specifically about cookies and user experience. So talking about when you open up a site and you see the pop-up boxes, hey, this site uses cookies, and you have to give it permission. So I know you talked a little bit about some browsers, Chrome specifically, are going to block these in the future. So how is that going to change moving forward for the user?
Yeah, so first-party cookies are really about providing a good user experience. So, pretty much any website you visit is going to drop a cookie on your browser. And that's a first-party cookie, typically. It identifies who you are. It can be used for a lot of reasons. It could be, if it's a site that you have to log into, it may make the process of staying logged in much simpler and more frictionless. It may allow personalization of content based on what you're interested in. And, not many people are going to argue that that's a bad thing. But other cookies get dropped, these third-party cookies. And, if you use some of the browser extensions that identify what these are, you'll often see that I think the example of really bad user experience was one of the Boston news outlets, I think it's boston.com, was dropping so many cookies on users that they were creating this horrendous experience where the site took forever to load. They were just gathering a lot of information that was all advertising related from a range of ad tech companies. It really wasn't focused at all on making the visitors experience better. It was more about surveillance. What can we learn about you so that we or somebody else can sell you advertising? So I think those first-party cookies, those aren't going away. It's really the third-party cookies that browser developers are primarily concerned about and are looking to make extinct.
Awesome. Thank you for elaborating on that one. I'm looking at the Q&A section and it looks like we do not have any more unanswered questions. Does anyone have any last minute thoughts, questions, concerns, anything like that? If so, feel free to drop it into the chat or the Q&A feature. Don't everybody get up at once.
Well, it seems like we're in good shape here on questions, although this is obviously an evolving topic and one that we're very interested in continuing the conversation about. So just in closing, I really hope that everybody who attended found something of interest in the presentation today. Ian, thanks for running through that with us. As Cassie said, do look for a follow-up from us with the recording of this presentation, as well as some follow-up information. And as I said, we're looking very interested in continuing the conversation. We're also interested in hearing from you about other topics that might be of interest to you. So as we continue this webinar series, if you have other burning questions or topics or things that you think you're interested in or others might be, we'd love to hear from you on those as we frame webinar topics going forward. So with that, I think I'll close us out. I want to thank everybody again for attending, and we look forward to continuing this series. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.